Welcome back. The title of this mini lecture is Great Migrations. And we're going to talk about 5 things that as you read more about this particular topic, it's good to key in on these in order to really start to get a sense of what you're reading and about the time period and about what Black Americans experienced here during this era. So let's get into it. So the first thing would be post-war South. Right? So the conditions that existed really across the American South in the aftermath of the American Civil War are significant factors in the process of migration for African Americans, right? So you've got the economic devastation that hit the American South after the Civil War, right? The South doesn't return to pre-war economic levels till the 19 teens. You've got the infrastructure just absolutely laid to waste, right? The process of that would take years. It would take decades, right? You've got the 13th Amendment, the ending of slavery, right? You've got these very, 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 very violent conditions whereby former Confederates in these states are lobbying for authority versus Reconstruction authority. You've got the KKK. You've got this racial violence, which is endemic throughout the region, and lynchings and all of this, which kind of leads us into our second point, which, of course, is Jim Crow, right? Jim Crow, along with those economic conditions and the violence, was a significant factor in the decisions of many to leave the American South in the last decades of the 19th and throughout the first decades of the 20th century. Remember, Jim Crow is a process of legalized segregation. It should be noted, of course, that Plessy versus Ferguson, the very significant court case in the 1890s from the Supreme Court, which articulates the doctrine of separate but equal, which, of course, was inherently unequal. Jim Crow as a process doesn't begin after Plessy. It is already there, both in the South and other parts of the country. It's just validated by Plessy. And that's another good thing for us to know, right? So inasmuch as the lion's share of Black Americans are living in the American South prior to 1900, for the vibrant Black communities that existed often in urban areas and other parts of the country, such as in Chicago or Pittsburgh, which is called Allegheny City at the time. So eventually they all link up, and it's Pittsburgh. But the idea of legalized forms of racial segregation or legalized forms of discrimination existed in those places too. Third, trains and the Chicago Defender. The effort on the part of rail lines and rail industries to link up connections, particularly with places like Memphis, Tennessee, Chicago, and then eventually New York, are going to play a central role in providing the conduit for African Americans to be able to travel northward. Being able to get train tickets on the Illinois Central Railroad and travel up north, right? This was a big deal. Right, this was a big deal. So the rail lines in the second half of the 19th century being rebuilt after the Civil War, right, this is a process that kind of helps to speed that along. The Chicago Defender, right? So in the early 20th century, newspapers centrally kind of run by and aimed for Black Americans, right, were relatively limited in scope, but the Chicago Defender was perhaps the most noted. And so you had individuals along some of these train lines pass it out to other African Americans, and in the Chicago Defender, you would find ads for jobs. You would find ads from the Urban League and other organizations that would offer assistance to African Americans and their families if they would begin a process of coming to a place like Chicago. Fourth would be the Urban League. So the Urban League, the National Urban League, was founded in 1910, and the idea was that it was a sort of community organization that provided assistance, economic assistance, right, job training and assistance, and housing for Black Americans as they arrived in urban areas. And they're particularly going to have an effect, in places like Chicago or in Harlem, right, other areas in the first decades of the 20th century. So remember, when we're talking about migrations, right, or great migrations, the one that most folks tend to think of is the one really between about 1910 and about 1920 or so. But historians now look at it more as migrations, in that you're looking at a few of them occurring in the 20th century. So ones will occur, up through World War II and later and that kind of thing. But when we're thinking of the Urban League, right, we're thinking of kind of the main one in the 19 teens, right, early 20s and all of that. And the fifth might be Chicago, right? The fifth point sort of might be Chicago. So many of the African Americans who are going to come northward will do so, into major urban environments, and Chicago was one of these, right? The south side of the city was one place. There are other parts of the city, the west side as well, that African Americans are going to migrate to, working in some cases in the stockyards and in other forms of industrial employment in the city, and not exactly well liked on the part of their white counterparts. And although they're able to carve out what becomes known as sort of a black metropolis in Bronzeville, forms of discrimination, of course, still existed for Black Americans in the city of Chicago in the first decades of the 20th century. But their experiences helped to sort of shape the character of the city and the racial dynamics of the city, and that acceptance and discrimination, right, of course, is laid bare with the brutal murder of the young black teenager, and racial violence that breaks out in the city in 1919. Thank you.